Background: I live in a small Midwestern town with a population of about 400. This must have started around 6 or 7 years ago. When I was around 13, my grandpa has owned a small house just off a highway, right smack dab in middle of town, for over 30 years now. Around COVID times, my aunt moved in with him, and while my grandpa is a truck driver, so gone a good chunk of the time, I would stay with my aunt quite a bit. We had no Wi-Fi, so most of our pastime was spent coloring, listening to music or telling scary stories, mostly family stories. Around this time, we would sometimes hear the usual bumps in the night. One night, while my aunt was alone, she said she heard the sound of metal jingling but ignored it. Another few days go by. My grandpa comes home to find a lock on his cellar door to be in pieces on the ground, as if they were cut by bolt cutters. My aunt concluded that this must have been what she heard. The only other big thing that happened then was once my aunt heard her dog, a huge German Shepherd Great Pyrenees, barking uncontrollably outside. When she went out to check, a man was standing over the fenced-in backyard. He took off running when she came outside. Around a year later, my aunt moved out for a while, and nothing seemed to happen over at that house. At least that we know of. Of course, there's no way of really knowing, considering my grandpa was at work weeks at a time with no one else at the house. However, over at my house, this was when things started to pick up. My parents worked nights, leaving me and my two younger brothers alone. Their sleep schedule would impact ours a lot, leading us to stay up until early morning a lot. We would hear the occasional taps on windows and footsteps outside. Twice, things got really bad at my window specifically. Someone had slapped the window by my head while I was sleeping one night. Another time, while my parents were home, the sounds, lights of a camera were coming from right outside. My parents would either look themselves or call a male family member to come look around our house, and never saw anything. This all lost until I am about 16 and my aunt moves back in with my grandpa. Things are okay for about a year when everything starts back up again. Please note that my uncle moved into our town about a year before my aunt moved back in. Things ramp up by a lot. Once, about 2 summers ago, when I was 17, I was half asleep in my room around 2 a.m. when someone started banging on the front door. I have never actually heard the police bang on a door, but it sounds just as if it's shown in movies. My dog was going crazy, so I knew I wasn't the only one who heard it, but it was late enough for me to choose to ignore it and try to go back to sleep, but I couldn't. So I got up, and as I was about to step into our kitchen, it happened again. But I knew at this point that if it was the police or someone in need of help, they would say something, but it was dead silent. Apart from the banging, the dog, and my heartbeat. I sat on the floor and called my stepdad, asking for advice when my brother lazily walked out of his room, asking what was going on. He took my dog and answered the door, to be faced with nothing. Of course, this last summer, I got into the habit of sleeping on the couch when my parents were at work because my friend and I would camp out there. However, one night, when it was just me, I woke up at around 6 a.m. to both front and back doors completely wide open for no reason. None of our animals had run out amazingly, so I had to conclude that they had just been opened. This happened a separate time where I unfortunately didn't wake up, and my mom came home from work in the morning to doors blown open and all of our pets in the yard to be rounded up. This past year has been horrible for my aunt when she's alone. 1. She has woken in the middle of the night to a man holding a flashlight in her window. 2. She had a small red dot hit her chest from the same window. 3. She came home one night and let her dog out. And when she did, 2 major things happened at once. She saw a man start taking off from behind a tree, and her dog started eating something that wasn't there before. Her dog can be slightly aggressive when it comes to food, so although she tried to take it, she ended up swallowing it before she could. The dog later on acted as if she was sick and very tired. She wouldn't eat anything. Her tongue lolled and she cried. My aunt was worried sick, believing whoever was running off from behind the fence throw Benadryl in a burger patty at her dog to put her to sleep. Mind you, this dog is probably her biggest protection when she's alone. 4. A car pulled into the driveway one night. My aunt heard metal jangling again, and then she heard banging coming from the basement door that connects to the house. Her dog barked at whoever was trying to get in the door, and soon after, my aunt heard the car take off again. This time, she says the metal sounded like the cellar doors being thrown open. 5. Once she was painting her closet, she opened the back door to let the fumes out. In daylight, she never saw anything. But suddenly, the dog bounced up and she could hear nails hitting the kitchen tiles as she ran towards the bedroom, then turned around and took off outside, growling and barking at something. 6. Many points in the backyard fence leaning so far back that it appears someone is bending it back to crawl over it, right where the cameras conveniently doesn't point, showing that whoever this is knows where the cameras are. Other than my aunt, my grandpa had stories of his own. Twice, while he was home alone, he heard someone banging on the side of his house, and the second time, it sounded to him like they were fully body slamming the front door. Both times, he went out to look, and no one had been there. But the most important thing, on his security camera, one night while my aunt was pulling into the driveway, there was a man crouched behind bushes, rolling down the hill, out of my aunt's sight as she got out. This is the only time a person has shown up on the cameras. However, it's not the first time they have triggered the motion sensor in them. It's happened quite a bit, but they are always just out of view before something happens. Based on all of this information, I originally thought this was just happening to our family for some odd reason. But upon asking some other women in the area, it's not just us. Other women, when they are home alone, have been experiencing similar things. A lady close to my aunt even mentioned someone full-on frogging, squatting, and stealing her food at night. I'm not sure why it's happening, who is doing it, or what's gonna happen when they are inevitably caught by someone, but it's scary nonetheless. It also seems to be ramping up as time goes by. The latest couple of happenings involving genuine attempts at break-ins, which never happened before my aunt left all those years ago. So I guess the wildest thing I have ever experienced happened last year, and I still don't know how to explain it without sounding like I'm making it up. But here it goes. It started with these little things going missing. I live alone in a pretty quiet neighborhood, so I figured I was just forgetful. A protein bar here, a sock there, whatever. Then my TV would be on a different input. Then I left it. Nothing huge, just enough to make me second guess myself. The weirdest part, I would hear these faint bumps in the ceiling sometimes. I chalked it up to raccoons or whatever. My house is old, stuff creaks. But then one night, I came home late from work, and I could swear I saw a shadow move past the vent opening in the hallway ceiling. I told myself I was tired, imagination, but I couldn't shake the feeling. So I set up one of those cheap motion sensor cameras I bought off Amazon, pointed it straight at the attic access panel in the hallway. 2 nights later, I got a notification at 2:17 a.m. Motion detected. I opened the clip and my stomach dropped. There was a person climbing down from the attic, like full-on quietly stepping down the ladder, looking around and heading into my kitchen. I froze. I was in the house at the time that clip was taken. I called the cops immediately, locked myself in my room with a bat, freaking out while they did a full sweep. They found no one at first, but when they checked the attic, there was a little setup up there, a sleeping bag, some snacks, a small camping stove, empty water bottles. Someone had clearly been living up there. The person was my neighbor's grown son, who apparently had some drug issues and got kicked out a while back. He broke in when I was on vacation a few months earlier and just never left. He would sneak down at night to grab food or watch TV. He got arrested. I moved out 3 weeks later. I still have trouble sleeping in total silence because now every creak makes me think someone's crawling around above me. This isn't my story, but instead my grandma's story. She told me this story a little while ago, after I asked her what was one of the most creepiest things that's ever happened to her. This happened to her over 8 years ago at one of our local malls. It was around early December that month, an early evening when my grandma had gone to the mall. She had gone to the mall to do some early Christmas shopping that year for my family and some of her friends. She was at Macy's in the men's clothing section when it happened. My grandma was looking for some polos and pants when she noticed something out of her peripheral vision. She looks to see what it is and sees that it's a man staring back at her. She describes the man to be somewhere in his mid to late 40s. My grandma, being the kind soul, she just looks at him, gives him a brief smile, and goes back to looking at the clothes. She eventually leaves the area and goes to the men's fragrance department to look at different colognes. While she was checking out the fragrances, she once again notices someone in her peripheral vision, but they are standing still this time. She looks to see who it is, and it's the same guy from earlier. She glances at the guy and sees that he's just looking at her with a blank, emotionless expression on his face. My grandma is not a paranoid person and just chops the whole thing up as being one major coincidence. She stays in the fragrance department for another 10 minutes and goes to the women's section. After being in the women's clothing section for about 15 minutes, she heads over to the women's fragrance department. She is skimming through the different fragrances when she catches a glimpse of someone on the other side of the counter. She looks up out of curiosity to see it's the same exact guy again. My grandma could see the same black stare he was giving her as he made his way over to the same side of the counter she was at. She watched as he came over to her side, but had stood about 20 yards away from her. My grandma decides to leave Macy's shortly after and head inside the mall to visit the other stores in there. She goes to the first few stores with no incident, but when she makes her way to the fourth store, that's when she notices it. She turns around to see the same creep from Macy's following her. A pit had begun to form on her stomach as she realized that this guy was bad news and very likely had ill intentions towards her. She goes in the fourth store, which thankfully the guy didn't enter, but she was a bit on edge because of it. This went on for a while. Every time my grandma went to a different store, as the creep followed her but always kept his distance. My grandma eventually made her way to the bottom floor of the mall. That's when she decided that she needed to find a way to get away from this man. She was looking around to see if anyone would help her until she spotted a security guard not too far ahead. She went up to him, explained her current situation, and asked him to see if he could escort her back to her car. The security guard agreed and had escorted her out of the mall and back to her car. The creep saw that my grandma was talking to the security and stood there not going any further. While they were walking through the mall, the guy still followed them, but at a much further distance than he previously did. During their walk through the mall, the security guy explained to her how my grandma did the right and how very lucky she was that day. My grandma questioned him, and the guy explained to her that apparently some lady was stalked through the mall and was abducted shortly after a few months ago. Security went on to explain they never found the women and have yet to find the person who abducted her. It wasn't until my grandma and security were almost at the exit that the creep lost interest and walked the opposite way where he was going. My grandma thanked the man, and the man watched her get to her car and leaving the parking lot safely to make sure she wasn't followed. My grandma is forever thankful for security being around that day, as she firmly believes that it was her guardian angel protecting her. She also believes that if it wasn't for that guy who helped her, she could have been abducted and been forced into a human trafficking operation and would have likely never been seen again. My grandma didn't return to the mall for a very long time after that farm out of fear. She goes to that mall occasionally, but only does when she's either with my mom, her friends, or with me for her own safety. Okay, so I have an old story. To me it's pretty creepy, and I've thought about it over the years at random times in my life. I was a preteen grew up and still live in a relatively small town in Washington state, on the other side of the mountains from the coast. Our town is in a valley, very safe growing up. My mom had a long-time friend from high school, and she had a son my younger brother's age and a daughter a year older than me, so we spent a lot of time together. I was a pretty quiet, introverted kid due to the environment I lived in, which is not relative to the story, but the reason I never spoke about what happened until now. The girl's name was Heather. She was very outgoing, very much a bully. Looking back now, I realize it was her way of survival with the kind of mother she had. Her mom scared the shit out of me. Anyways, I would hang out with Heather, even though I really don't like to because she was mean. One of the things we would do that I had done with several friends growing up was sleep outside, in the backyard without a tent, just in sleeping bags. It was definitely a different era then. No fences, anyone could have seen us from the road, but there wasn't the thought that something bad could happen. It was summer and we planned to sleep outside, like we had many times before, but this night I just had an awful feeling that something wasn't right. An unsettling feeling. Nothing I can put my finger on. We talked and laughed, and then it got really late, so Heather started falling asleep. Her home was a duplex, one story with a carport on each side. You could see through the carport into the backyards easily. Residential area in town, so the mountains that surround our valley were several miles away. The backyard had bushes against a fence that then led to the backyards of the next street up's houses, and then a busy road beyond the street. Like I said, we had slept outside in her backyard many times before, without anything ever happening. This night, I had a strange feeling, the one you get when you are being watched, and I stayed laying in my sleeping bag as Heather slept beside me, but kept my eyes open, looking all around us as covertly as possible, trying to figure out why I felt so scared. I realized there wasn't any noise, no cars driving on the busy road 2 streets over. It was like 10 on a Saturday night. No birds, the cricket stopped, just pure silence. I get goosebumps now, thinking about it. I cannot explain the sickening feeling that suddenly came over me, if it was anxiety or something else. But then, my ears started ringing, and it was this high-frequency noise mixed with TV static. It was painful, and as I was thinking about going inside to get my mom and figure out why my ears were ringing and painful, Heather sat straight up, eyes open, breathing heavily. She moved so robotically, but fast. Her head turned all the way to her right, to where I was lying staring up at her with my eyes wide, and I realized the ringing had stopped. Still no other sounds. She was looking my way but not focused on me, like she was looking through me. And then she started talking. I thought she was mumbling, maybe sleep talking, and then it hit me that she was speaking some other language. My mom is white, my dad is Mexican, so I have grown up bilingual, and I knew she was speaking another language and not gibberish, but it was nothing I could put my finger on. She continued to get louder, and I swear everything got darker. The moon had been out, no clouds, so you could see fairly well, and then it was pitch black as she continued speaking this strange language, but it was still silent, but something was moving out of the corner of my eye. I slowly turned my head away from Heather and saw a black shadow. No features, still no noise, and it emerged from the ground in the yard next to us, by the neighboring duplex. I knew it couldn't be anyone from there, because it was a young girl and her toddler and then an old couple in that duplex, and I couldn't explain what I was seeing. It gradually got larger and was shaped like a cloud figure, moving very slowly towards us. I was frozen. My fight or flight didn't kick in. All of a sudden, as I'm watching this dark figure slowly creep over the grass, coming towards us, it moves fast, like a rush of black smoke, right into Heather. She immediately started screaming the unknown words and shaking. I shot up so fast and ran inside and woke up my mom, screaming that something was wrong. Heather's mom heard me and both moms ran outside. I stood at the back door watching in fear. Heather was laying in her sleeping bag, sleeping soundly. I could hear cars going by, birds, crickets, all the normal nighttime sounds. They looked back at me like I was crazy and woke Heather up, asking if she was okay. She said yes, totally normal, and they asked if I wanted to go back to sleep out there. I refused and slept in the living room. Heather wouldn't come inside. The next morning, we were supposed to go to church with her grandma. Her grandma picked us girls up and I sat in the back seat while she sat up front. She hadn't talked to me as we were getting ready and completely avoided me, which was weird because she was the kind of kid who needed to be around people, constantly talking and asserting herself. As her grandma was saying what time we would be back to her mom's, I leaned up and asked Heather if she remembered anything from last night. She said no, and I began explaining what happened. The driver's side door was open and I didn't see her grandma coming up. She heard me asking Heather if she remembered anything and how she knew another language when I had known her my whole life and never heard her speak anything but English. Her grandma asked me what happened and immediately asked me what the language sounded like. So I went through what happened without telling her about the shadow or strange, painful ringing in my ears. Her grandma was super serious and took it all in. She don't say anything else or ask any more questions. And we rode in silence to church for the most part, other than Heather telling me I sounded crazy. We usually sat in the middle at her grandma's friends. But that day, she made us sit in the first pew. She held Heather's hand an entire time, praying and crying. It was very out of the norm, and Heather was annoyed and embarrassed, and kept trying to bring her hand away. When church finished, we walked back to the car and got it. Her grandma didn't start the car to leave, and instead turned to Heather. I can't remember word for word what she said, but I remember her telling her that she must go to church every Sunday, and that she was going to have her stay with her for the rest of summer break. And she said that she would protect her. I think Heather was happy to get away because her mom was pretty abusive, but I knew her grandma wasn't talking about her mom. She said she had met something when she was very young and it spoke a language that she had never heard before, but she knew what it was saying. It offered her a way out of where she was, that she needed to agree and would be saved, but that she knew it wasn't God, that it was something dark, and that she would rather suffer and die than say yes. I saw Heather less and less, and then my grandparents took me and my brother in, and we lived in the same town, but hung around different groups. So I would see her at school sometimes, but that was it. Our moms remained in contact. And last year, my mom mentioned that Heather's grandma had passed away. I said, oh, that's too bad. I barely remember her. And my mom mentioned that she had a very hard life and that she had been in a concentration camp when she was young. I knew she was from Norway, but had never heard this. I put two and two together and I believe whatever came for Heather that night was similar or the same thing that came for her grandma while in the concentration camp. And that night, those odd words are burned into my mind. I have never heard anything remotely close to that strange language since.